Hi everyone, this is Sharon. I am back after what seems like forever since I turned the camera on. I think it's been a couple of weeks, but we've been indulging in some much needed family time, so that was all good. What I thought I would do today is just come on for a quick tutorial on a couple of, I guess they're page alterations or page embellishments. I pulled these ideas from Alice, who had asked about me demonstrating some of these in the giveaway video that I had out there. So I'm still working through that list, and we'll work on that for quite a while on some of the suggestions from people. So I put together maybe 6 different techniques here today, and I'll just step through them one by one. And I'm not set up to sew on camera, so I pretty much did everything ahead of time, and I'll just sort of step through and talk about the technique. So a lot of these are techniques that I like to use, and some of them I haven't actually used in a while, but I like to do some of these, and most of them are with the sewing machine, to alter the size of the paper in order for it to fit the journal. So I'm always trying to think of creative ways that I can shrink up the size either in the width or the length to make it fit my journal cover. And I've been sewing pretty much all my life, clothing and other things on fabric. And so I'm always thinking of what techniques do I do on fabric that I could apply to paper. So that's always kind of a fun perspective for anyone who's done sewing to kind of think of it in those terms. So this is something I did quite a while ago, maybe a couple of years back, in some Alice in Wonderland journals I made. It was sort of a nod to the hare or the rabbit, and it kind of imitates what I would say like a men's dress shirt. And so what I did was make this placket out of the paper and then added some buttons on the top. Now to achieve this, and what this does is it actually takes up, and brings the width of your paper in double this, so probably almost 3 inches in width. And so to achieve this, what I did was, and I'm doing black stitching on white paper, hopefully you can see that. So to achieve this, I took a plain piece of paper and folded it so that I could stitch down here. And what you do is kind of form a tube then. And I did that on this side of the page. So I just folded it and decided, okay, I want my placket this wide, and your placket is going to be as wide as from the stitching to the fold. So I stitched down here, and then it creates this tube. And then to make the placket on this, like this one, I use a bone folder and kind of stick it in the edge to coax it open. And then what you do is you fold it so that half of it is folded to the left of the seam and half of it is folded to the right. And you just fold that down flat. So you've got essentially a little tuck on each side of that. And then what I did on this one, and what I like to do typically, is to do 2 rows of stitching, one along this side. So you would flip this over and stitch along here, so you're only catching, that piece, not this underside piece. And then to stitch this side on your machine, you're going to want to flip all of this over this way and then stitch along this side. Hopefully that makes sense, so that when you're done, you can see I've got my little hollow tube there. And I've stitched along this side, and then I've stitched along this side. And I glued across the top and I glued across the bottom so that it holds everything down. And then I just added the buttons on top, and it makes it look like a dress shirt. And the fun thing about it is that it forms a couple of little tucks on either side, which is fun. Now, what I've done also in the past, I did not do it on this one, but if you really want to make it realistic, you could stitch across horizontally where each of your buttons will go, and then put the buttons on top of the stitching, and that'll kind of give the impression that there are buttonholes underneath there. And just another note, these buttons are from Tracy Fox, Love Junk Journals, one of her latest kits. It's, I think it's Fabric Swatches Ephemera Kit, if I'm not mistaken. Really pretty buttons. So that's that one. So you've got this now, and you've taken the length of your, or the width going this way in about 3 inches, you know, and you can adjust that to make it fit. And what you see on the back side is just a very simple seam going up and down. Now you could choose to cover that or just leave it as is. And then another variation, you can really have fun and play around with this. So I took these strips of paper and just did a border punch on those. The border punch I used for these is this Fiskars punch I've had for quite a while. So I just punched the edge of a piece of paper, and if you lay that down here and here, now you have a fancy shirt, more like a tuxedo kind of a look. So you can do all kinds of embellishing. Okay, so that is that one. Another variation you can do going vertically is same technique. You're going to fold your paper over, stitch down to take up some of that width. And then instead of splitting it half and half on each side, you would take this piece here and fold the whole thing over so that it actually forms a tuck. And then that's what I did on this one. So here's my stitching line, and it actually forms a tuck here, and you can either glue it top and bottom. Here I added some washi tape top and bottom. You can embellish it however you want. And again, you can keep the stitching. You can use decorative stitching. If you go back to your little strip of punched paper, I like to do this a lot instead of the washi. Maybe you just lay a strip of that down for some decoration along the side. And again, you've been able to alter the size of your page without actually cutting it off. Now you might say, well, I just prefer to cut it off, and that's okay. Sometimes I like to just do this to add a little interest, and many times I do it with book pages, because let's say you have a book page, for example, where you might have a flower or something really pretty that goes to the edge of the page. You don't want to chop that off, or you've got script or writing, or you like the way the page number looks on the bottom. You don't want to have to chop that off top or bottom. This would be a nice technique to be able to alter those book pages without actually having to cut them off. Okay, so that is that one. And again, you just see the single seam here up and down, and you can choose to embellish that, cover it, you know, put a strip of paper over it, however you want to address that. Okay, then the next one again is just another variation, but this time it's going horizontally. So maybe the width of your paper is okay, but it's too tall and you don't want to have to chop it off. So here I did the same thing, only I used a decorative stitch. So again, you would take your paper, and let's say this is top to bottom. You would fold your paper over and do a stitch so that you've got it, you know, the new height that you want. And then again, instead of splitting it, you would just fold the whole thing down. So this is the top of your page. Now you've folded the flap down, and it creates a nice little tuck. So here I just glued down the side, and it creates a top tuck on the page. And in this one I used a decorative stitch. Then I just added a little paper button again on there. And I really do like to use paper buttons instead of, well, I shouldn't say instead of, because I do like to use real buttons too. But sometimes if my journal is getting particularly bulky, I will go to a digital button. And some of the digitals, like Tracy Fox's buttons, are very realistic, and you have to take a second look to see if they're real or not. So that's that side, and then this side, I also added a button on that side as well. And so when you're working with this, you're working with the whole page. You'd stitch across, fold it down, and glue your sides. And then if you fold it, you've got yourself a page for your signature. And again, you've got that stitching line on the back side, but it's very clean looking. Nothing messy at all. But again, get my trusty little decorative strip here. You could put that across the top on the back side. just to cover it up or embellish it a little bit. Okay, so that is that one. Then another technique that Alice had asked about is this one. And this is one I did in a journal. I actually used strips of fabric, and I think it was ribbon, and I think it might have been velvet ribbon. But for today's demonstration, I'm using paper. And what I did, it kind of mimics a bulletin board type of effect. And what I did was just basically cut a bunch of 1/2-inch strips of paper. This is scrapbooking paper. And I just make sure it's plenty long. I don't try to measure it so it's exact to the page. And then I just lightly mark with pencil on either side of the strip so I know where they have to lay. And then I take those all off and just glue down the side here in between my pencil marks so that I can glue the strips along the edge here, along the edge on top, and then along the edge on this side and then the bottom. So this is all loose, you know, on the interior, and it's only glued down around the outsides. Then wherever they crisscross, I added some buttons, again, some of Tracy Fox's buttons. And you could get really creative with that as well. I think on the other one that I did in the journal I made, I used real buttons and velvet ribbons, so it was a bit fancier. And then once I have that all glued down, then you can simply come along and cut your strips to the right length. Oops, and this one. And you have yourself kind of a bulletin board looking page, and it's a really fun place to tuck some ephemera and notes and things in between the slats. And you could also, if you wanted to punch a little hole, you could hang some charms from some pins on there. And again, get nice and creative with that one. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Well, this is a fun one that I really enjoyed. Again, this was in one of the Alice in Wonderland journals I made. So this was another technique where I wanted to take the height of the page and it was too tall. And I thought, okay, what are some sewing techniques I know and use? And one thing that came to mind was a simple seam. You know, in your clothing, you create seams. And so what I did, again, if we open this up, I created a seam up here, and you can use the same technique again. So you just pull up your page, you know, creating that hollow tube, stitch along there, and then you can do that however many times you want. If you want to go down the page again, like I did here, I did 2 of them, stitch, and what you get when you're done is, again, this tube after you stitch your seam in there. And then I took the edge of that tube and put it in my paper punch to finish off the edges. The other thing you could do also would be to just cut along this edge with the decorative scissors, and that would do the same thing. What that does is it opens up that loop, and now you have 2 sides to your seam, and you can just press those open on either side, top and bottom. And then what I did was I glued along the side here, and I glued along the side here, and you could also stitch that down and then press those open, and then that creates some fun little tuck spots or pockets on the page, either from the top or the bottom. It's also pretty and decorative, so you could do, you know, a number of those depending on how big your paper was. And again, on the back side, it's a very clean look. You just have your seams that are barely visible. So it's just something fun and different. And then lastly, sometimes your page is too long, but if you fold it down, it just has a shallow little pocket or tuck on the top. And it's not quite long enough to be practical. So in those cases, a lot of times I'll take a strip of decorative paper or scrapbooking paper, and here I punched the edge again to make it decorative, and then I just stitch that onto that flap with some decorative stitching. And then you can either glue down the sides to create an enclosed pocket or leave it loose like this and just use it as a tuck spot on the top of the page. But that's another practical way to create something if you don't have enough paper to work with. And then on the other side of this one, I just did something a little bit different. I've got the same small flap on the top that came down, and what I did was just take a piece of fabric and tuck it under there and stitch it a couple of times to secure it. And now you've got this flip, and it creates a nice little private journaling spot underneath. And a nice decorative page. So that is pretty much what I have prepared for today. I hope that these techniques were enough to get you inspired to pull out your sewing machine and try some interesting and different ways to either alter your page sizes or create some tuck spots and other interesting embellishments. So for today and until next time, bye-bye.